A woman is discovered bludgeoned to death. Her husband is convicted of her murder. He claims that an intruder killed his wife. Revolutions in forensic science may help disclose the truth. It is one of the most famous murder cases of the 20th century that inspires the TV series The Fugitive. Some believe an innocent man was wrongfully convicted.
My father's life was destroyed.
It resulted in the death of my mother, who shot herself.
I will never forget that. I will never let you forget that.
The depth of my anger knows no bounds.
Others say justice was served.
To come to any kind of conclusion that there's another person in the room is just not well thought.
This is a story of how advancements in forensic science over almost half a century lead to new clues. 4 versions of the murder will be reenacted, each providing a new and shocking twist. Early morning, July 4th, 1954, police respond to a panicked phone call from a wealthy suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. The call has come from the home of a young physician, Dr. Sam Sheppard. Inside a gruesome murder scene, Sheppard's young wife, Marilyn, beaten to a pulp. Sam and Marilyn Sheppard's only son, Sam Jr., was 7 years old when his mother was murdered. He was in the next room.
My recollection is just being awakened by 2 adults in my bedroom. A policeman stood and blocked my view into the murder room, fortunately. I never saw that. And they took me down the stairs and out the front door. On the threshold of that door, somehow I felt my universe had been flipped upside down. There was this moment in my life that I knew everything was lost.
The 7-year-old boy has seen and heard nothing. Police need to talk to his father, Dr. Sheppard, to get his story. 2 experienced homicide detectives are summoned from Cleveland. The coroner has already removed Marilyn's body.
What a mess. Hey, Dr. Gerber, Detective Schottky, this is Detective Carroll.
He tells them that Dr. Sheppard is not at home, but in hospital with serious injuries.
Dr. Sheppard, we just came from your house. We had a look around, and why don't you tell us exactly what happened last night?
We had the Herds over for supper. It was a lovely evening.
Dr. Sam Sheppard gives the first version of the events, launching one of the most famous and complex murder investigations ever.
Finished eating around 8:30, and then we moved to the sitting room to watch a movie on television. Marilyn sat on my lap for a bit before I moved to the sofa to have a snooze.
Around 4:30 a.m., the sleeping Sheppard is awakened by a scream.
I charged into the room, was then struck down. And then the next thing I recall, I came to and had a realization that I'd been struck and that something was wrong. I looked at my wife and I believe I checked her pulse. And I felt that she was gone. I heard a noise downstairs. I saw a form running from the front door down to the lake.
Sheppard says he chases this mysterious killer. He loses his t-shirt in the struggle.
I remember a choking or a twisting feeling. This terminated my consciousness. The next thing I knew, I had a groggy recollection of being at the water's edge on my face. I made my way back up the stairs to the house. I felt disoriented, or that I was a victim of a strange dream.
The detectives now head back to the crime scene to look for evidence. They can find no murder weapon, and there are other strange facts.
Oh, absolutely no sign of a forced entry, front or back.
For the cops, Sheppard's story of an unknown intruder doesn't make sense.
Anything look like it's been moved?
Somebody's a sportsman. Looks like our guy missed a few things, huh? Pretty tidy burglary.
Yeah, or a pretty messy something else.
There are other inconsistencies. The family dog didn't wake up. Neither did Sam Jr.
Check out the mess upstairs.
The t-shirt Dr. Sheppard was wearing is missing, and he called friends before the police. Jim Neff is an investigative journalist. He says the detective's suspicions of Sheppard was textbook tunnel vision.
In the 1950s, to the police and to outsiders, if you have a murdered wife in bed and there isn't any signs of intrusion, then 19 times out of 20, the chief suspect is going to be the husband.
Sam Sheppard's son says it's unthinkable that his father murdered his mother.
I had an idyllic childhood in a lot of ways. I mean, my parents loved me no end. My dad was hugely proud of having the first male grandchild in the family. And he was kind of an American prince in a lot of ways. He had never had anything go wrong in his life. He was the track star and the football star and always got his grades and always had the prettiest women after him. And he was a neurosurgeon or very close to certification to be a brain surgeon at a very young age, in his early 30s. And life was good.
Okay, Dr. Sheppard, we appreciate that you're talking to us. I know this is difficult, but we have some questions to ask you.
Was anything of value taken from your house?
I don't know. I didn't have time to check.
Well, you're sure there was an intruder, right?
Well, yes, he did this to me.
So you phoned the neighbor first, not the police?
It was the first number that came into my head.
Was your wife ever unfaithful?
No. God.
What about you? Were there other women in your life?
No.
Dr. Sheppard, you gotta see this from our side. You get burgled, but nothing of value's taken. You struggle with this intruder, but there's no sign of a forced entry. The t-shirt you were wearing is gone. You don't know where. The dog never barked. Your son didn't wake up the whole time that your wife was being killed. Now, I don't know about my partner, but I think you killed your wife.
An autopsy gives them their final proof. The coroner finds 35 wounds on Marilyn's body, including 15 fractures to her skull. Her battered hands indicate a massive struggle against her attacker. The coroner discovers that Marilyn was 4 months pregnant when she died. He concludes that the murder was an act of rage, not a sexual attack. The police are convinced that Dr. Sam Sheppard killed his wife, not an unknown intruder. But forensic science will lead to new evidence and a startling discovery. Over 3 weeks after the murder of Marilyn Sheppard, Dr. Sam Sheppard is arrested. The story sweeps across America of the handsome young doctor charged for a murder he claims an unknown man committed. The press descends on Cleveland. They smell a story when it's discovered that Sam was cheating on Marilyn.
When the element of sex was injected into this case, it electrified the TV news and the print reporters. It was your classic love triangle. Suddenly, this was much more juicy than your straightforward homicide. This is the old courthouse, jail, police complex. When Sheppard was brought down, people came from miles around, standing on these fences over here, peering in windows, trying to catch a glimpse of this new celebrity. I mean, this case was amazing. It was the first example of where TV journalism created a media frenzy, the new birth of TV news, and it became almost a spectacle, a parade.
This parade will have a major effect on the trial's outcome. The prosecution contends that Dr. Sheppard had motive to murder his wife.
We have the picture painted that, of course, Marilyn Sheppard and Dr. Sam Sheppard lived a perfect, compatible life while they were together. Now, this becomes very important in this case. Was that life so happy? Were these relations so compatible all of the time? Was there ever any thought of divorce between these persons? How did Sam Sheppard treat his wife? Did he love her? Did he not love her?
The prosecution drives home its case, casting Sheppard as a cold-hearted killer. The friendly dinner Sam described in his statement to police was not so friendly after all. Marilyn was smoking, something that enraged Sam.
Come sit with me.
He drank heavily, which is why he fell asleep on the couch. He awakens just before dawn. He goes upstairs and tries to have sex with Marilyn.
Off me! Jim! Shut up! Jim, Daddy, you are safe! Jim!
She refuses.
You sicken me! You're disgusting!
Overcome by rage, he bludgeons her to death. The prosecution contends that the murder weapon was some kind of surgical instrument. Sheppard goes to the lake and removes evidence of Marilyn's blood. He ransacks his house to make it look like a burglary. As for Sam's injuries, the prosecution contends they were partly self-inflicted and partly from the struggle with Marilyn. To the jury, it's beginning to look like Sam Sheppard did it.
But what happened next? What happened to your t-shirt? How come your dog didn't bark? And so time and time again, it was, I don't know. I have no information. I don't know. And so when you count up all the I don't knows and the no's and the negative responses, it's over 150. And so the impression was he had something to hide. He doesn't know. He's fuzzy on the details.
Then the prosecution produces a witness named Susan Hayes. She proves Sheppard is a liar. Here's the motive for murder.
And where did you remain that night?
At the Millers.
And where did Dr. Sam spend the night?
At the Millers.
Did you have intimate relations?
Were there other women in your life?
No.
Yes.
During the time that you knew and associated with Dr. Sheppard, was the subject of divorce ever mentioned?
Well, he said that he loved his wife very much. But not as a wife. And that he was thinking about getting a divorce.
Suddenly he was looking not only like a liar, but a philanderer. And at least in the minds of 1950s suburban America, it wasn't such a giant step from that to possibly killer of your spouse.
So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, They were having these sexual relations in the car and elsewhere. How much respect did Sam Sheppard have for his wife while he was doing that? If the defendant is a person who would lie under oath to protect the name of a lady, which he has admitted, how many more lies would he tell to protect his own skin? I knew Marilyn Sheppard not, but from the evidence in this case, every indication is that she was a fine and beautiful woman and deserved not the fate that she received at the hands of Sam Sheppard on the morning of July the 4th.
The Sheppard trial comes to an end in December 1954. After 5 days of deliberation, the judge delivers the jury's verdict to the media mob.
We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled and sworn, do find the defendant, Sam H. Sheppard, not guilty of murder in the first degree, but guilty of murder in the second degree. James C. Byrd, foreman.
Murder in the second degree means Sam Sheppard will not go to the electric chair. Dorothy Kilgallen, a journalist from New York, says the media circus poisoned the trial process.
I was aghast at the verdict. It may have been a correct verdict, but it was a verdict wrongly arrived at and therefore frightening. Dr. Sheppard may indeed have bludgeoned his wife to death on the morning of July 4th, but the prosecutors for the state of Ohio did not prove he was guilty any more than they proved there were pin-headed men on Mars.
Sam Sheppard gets a life sentence for the murder of his wife. It seems the case is closed. Flash forward 50 years. Modern forensic experts say if the crime were committed today, the trial may have had a different outcome. Dr. Cyril Wecht is a coroner in Pittsburgh who's worked on hundreds of murder cases.
The crime scene on July 4th, 1954 in the Sheppard case was not properly processed. There were no trained, experienced criminalists called to the scene. The coroner, Dr. Samuel Gerber, was not a criminalist and was not a forensic pathologist. He made observations which were factually incorrect. Harkening back to the question of whether or not this was a sex crime, we find, and this is quite surprising to me, I must say, and I have to be critical of someone who was a top forensic pathologist, that they did not do oral and anal swabs. So this was not, then, the most thorough and complete forensic scientific undertaking.
Another forensic expert has a medical explanation for Dr. Sheppard's fuzzy memories of that night.
With the period of unconsciousness that he sustained and that he attested to when he was first admitted to the hospital, you would expect someone like this to have a concussion. Today we call that a closed head injury. In 1950 we didn't have things like CAT scans or the ability to image the brain in order to see these things specifically, but there is a characteristic pattern of recovery of mentation, a recovery of memory, recovery of an understanding of the events that happen that occur as the brain recovers from that closed head injury.
But in 1954, Sam Sheppard has no such evidence on his side. 50 years later, in a rare television interview, Dr. Sheppard's brother Stephen says his brother's conviction was the most devastating event of his life.
The impact of Sam's conviction not only destroyed Sam and turned him into a very different person than the one who was charged with the crime. It resulted in the death of my mother, who shot herself in our master bedroom using my gun. My father died of a hemorrhaging gastric ulcer. Tom Reese, Marilyn's father, shot himself with a shotgun in a cheap motel room in East Cleveland. Angry? The depth of my anger knows no bounds.
Sam Sheppard has gone to jail on circumstantial evidence. There's only one way to prove that an unknown murderer killed Marilyn: forensic science.
So after the trial was over, they did what they should have done during trial from a defense lawyer's point of view, which was they hired the best forensic expert in the country, Dr. Paul Kirk.
Kirk is his generation's forensic pioneer.
He said, now wait a minute, I'm not on your side. You're paying me, I'm taking your money. I'm gonna examine stuff, and I'm gonna give you my report. And wherever that points, that's where it's gonna be.
Can crude 1950s forensic science clear Sam Sheppard? What Kirk discovers leads to another theory and another suspect. In January 1955, Dr. Paul Kirk returns to the Sheppard home, which has been sealed for 6 months. He has a rare opportunity to revisit a closed crime scene with forensic evidence intact. Dr. Kirk is pioneer of a forensic technique known as blood spatter analysis. He examines the shape, size, and pattern of the blood found throughout Marilyn's room. Kirk's objective is to reconstruct the crime based on science, not speculation. Peter DeForest is a former student of Dr. Kirk's.
Well, the bloodstain pattern stuff was one aspect of the reconstruction that Dr. Kirk undertook. And one of the key parts of that was that Dr. Kirk noticed that there was a overall pattern, what we call a radial pattern of spatter from the bludgeoning.
Kirk connects the trajectories of blood droplets originating from Marilyn's head spattered on all 4 walls. He determines that smaller droplets on the walls are from the blood-covered murder weapon, cast off as the killer bludgeoned Marilyn. These droplets reveal 2 critical new facts. 1, the killer would himself have been covered in blood spatter. Dr. Sam Sheppard was not. 2, the murderer is left-handed. Sheppard is right-handed. Then Dr. Kirk sees something unusual.
Dr. Kirk noticed a larger, different shaped droplet stain that seemed out of place, and so that was one that he thought may have been the result of the assailant bleeding.
Dr. Kirk recalls that Marilyn's teeth had been broken in the attack. He now theorizes that she must have bitten her assailant. Dr. Sheppard had no open wounds. Is Sam Sheppard innocent after all? Kirk turns his attention to a trail of blood on the stairs. The police concluded this came from a dripping murder weapon. But Dr. Kirk proves that the spots would get smaller if they came from a blood-soaked object. Those on the Sheppard staircase are the same size. The 4 universal blood types are A, B, AB, and O. Kirk determines the foreign blood is blood type O, same type as Marilyn's. But further tests show that the blood is not hers, and Sam is type A. Dr. Kirk concludes that the blood is from a 3rd person. Kirk is certain this is no domestic homicide. It's a sex slaying.
Dr. Kirk wrote a very detailed, groundbreaking forensic document that all the pieces sort of fit together for the first time. Suddenly, Dr. Sam's story had scientific validity in Dr. Kirk's interpretation of the physical evidence.
Dr. Kirk's findings present a version of events that supports Sam Sheppard's strange story. With Dr. Sheppard asleep downstairs, a mystery attacker enters the bedroom. He sexually assaults Marilyn. She fights back, biting. This is probably when she screams. He bludgeons her with an object, possibly a flashlight. Dr. Sheppard enters. They fight, and the killer flees. Dr. Kirk has given Sam Sheppard new faith that he will soon be set free.
The report is terrific. It proves my innocence beyond all question. Kirk's thoroughness shows what a great scientist he is. I'm so fired up now I can't sleep.
Kirk is an outsider to Cleveland's inner circle of lawyers, judges, and forensic scientists. The judge stands by the meager forensics that convicted Sam Sheppard. It's back to square one.
I used to visit him in a dungeon, literally in a big room, halfway buried under the ground, dark, except for a naked light bulb at the end of the room. In the shadows, guards patrolling behind our backs with drawn batons to beat on us if we did anything wrong.
Sam Sheppard has run out of options and hope. He languishes for 8 years before the infamous murder becomes famous. In 1963, the public's fascination with the MARILYN Sheppard murder case is revived by television. The Fugitive becomes the most popular series on American TV. It's the story of a doctor wrongly convicted of killing his wife who goes on the run to catch the true killer. Its final episode is the highest-rated program in TV history until it's beaten out by Dallas in 1980.
The Fugitive transformed the Sheppard case into a worldwide phenomenon. It kept the case alive and kept it in the public eye and made it notorious enough and with enough publicity potential for a young man by the name of F. Lee Bailey, for example, to approach the case and realize that it would be a springboard for his fame and fortune, which it was.
10 years since the trial, F. Lee Bailey rekindles the media spectacle based on a new fact. Journalist Dorothy Kilgallen was in the Cleveland courthouse in 1954. She tells Bailey that the Sheppard case was a show trial.
When she came down to cover the trial, she was such a celebrity that Judge Blythen invited her into his chambers because he wanted to meet her.
Glad to see you, Miss Kilgallen. I watch you on television very frequently.
And when he asked her, my goodness, what brings you all the way from New York to Cleveland for this little murder trial? She said, well, my gosh, everyone is talking about it. It's the most famous case, and it's a big murder mystery.
It's a mystery as to who did it.
Mystery. It's an open and shut case.
What do you mean?
Well, he's guilty as hell, there's no doubt about it.
And I'm paraphrasing her, but he said, murder mystery? What do you mean? Everyone knows he's guilty as hell. Well, she didn't share that story with her newspaper readers in '54, but she did tell the story, and it came to the ears of Lee Bailey.
Bailey digs around and learns Kilgallen's story is true. He takes this new evidence of the judge's bias to the media.
We filed what is called a petition for a writ of habeas corpus, which asks that he be released because his constitutional rights had been violated. And it came on before federal judge Carl A. Weinman in southern Ohio. He found that the judge who heard the case was a prejudiced man, had not been fair to Sam at all. Furthermore, that he didn't keep control of his courtroom.
In 1964, 10 years after MARILYN's murder, Sam Sheppard is released, filled with malice.
How much did it cost you?
10 years.
Oh, in money, sir.
Money could not possibly repay me for my mother's life. How much would it cost to bring her back? My father-in-law.
He makes no mention of his murdered wife. He is not free. The state of Ohio decides to retry him. In 1966, Sheppard goes on trial for the second time for the murder of his wife.
I think I can purely, absolutely vindicate myself.
The first case was built on scandal. Finally, 10-year-old forensic evidence is presented that was not heard at the original trial. The jury is presented with critical facts. The killer is left-handed. The blood on the stairs is from an unknown person, not Sam or MARILYN. So is the blood on the wall. And MARILYN's murder is a sex slave, not the act of an enraged husband. This time, forensic evidence outplays sexual scandal. The jury acquits. Sam Sheppard is finally a free man.
Get the hell out of the way.
He tries to return to his former life as a surgeon, but 10 years in prison have taken a heavy toll.
Obviously drinking too much vodka, a quart a day minimum, And he was an alcoholic.
2 patients die under the knife. He's disbarred from practice.
Well, he was taking uppers to wake up in the morning and downers to go to sleep at night.
His own family does not recognize him.
He'd come over to visit us and put his fist through the wall because he was frustrated and angry. I'd say, well, that's enough of that. Goodbye.
In 1970, just 6 years after his release, Sam Sheppard dies. He's just 46 years old.
The last few times I met with him, he knew he was going to die soon, and he just wanted to reassure me that he had confidence in me, that I mean, that's the only reason he lived. I mean, he would have committed suicide in 1954 or 55 if he hadn't had a son on the outside, because he loved my mother and his life was devastated and he had no reason to live. The only reason he stayed alive was so that I could survive.
The true story behind the fugitive might have died along with Sam Sheppard, but the public's imagination and a new generation of forensic experts keep it alive. The identity of the unknown suspect will finally be revealed. The final version of the MARILYN Sheppard murder mystery takes 40 years to emerge. By 1990, Sam Reese Sheppard has given up hope of finding the mystery attacker that his father claimed killed his mother.
I had a nervous breakdown, essentially. It took me 20 years to cry for my mother. And that's what the nervous breakdown was about, that I had never consciously cried for her death.
Then, a journalist in New York calls Sam Jr. with news he's not sure he wants to hear.
I grew up in Cleveland, and so I always had an interest in the Sheppard case and had a fascination about it. And my mother came to visit me at one point and mentioned that someone had been arrested for another murder who had worked in the Sheppard home. That person was Richard Eberling. Richard Eberling was a very troubled man. He had a troubled childhood. He was in foster homes. He was diagnosed as being psychotic at age 9.
Cynthia Cooper discovers that Eberling's father had died of poisoning. His son is suspected, but police can't prove it. She meets Eberling in prison, serving a life sentence for murdering an old woman.
He fantasized mightily about being in a family. He would steal figurines, and he would take them home and arrange them in little family clusters. Both in his correspondence and in person, he was a very creepy guy. He made confessory statements. He would interrupt an ordinary conversation in kind of a bizarre way. Like one time we were talking and he suddenly said, "Why do women fight back when they're raped?"
Has the case that will never die finally been solved? Is Richard Eberling MARILYN Sheppard's murderer?
So Richard Eberling changed windows, screen windows, did some odd jobs for MARILYN Sheppard. And in my interviews with him, he had this obsessive relationship with her. He viewed her as sort of the perfect mom that he never had. He described her as being so virginal and pure. And on the other hand, he also described how tight her shorts were and how she had this California look. So he kind of had that classic virgin whore dichotomy, his image of MARILYN Sheppard.
In 1959, Eberling was arrested for burglary. The police found rings that belonged to MARILYN Sheppard. He admits he took them, and even admits it might be his blood at the crime scene.
And then the detective said, this was just a wild shot. Well, what was your blood doing over there? And Richard Eberling said, oh, well, I cut myself. I cut my hand when I was putting in the storm windows, pulling one of the pins out of the windows slide the window in, I cut myself and I dripped all over the house. And so here he is in 1959 with Marilyn Sheppard's rings, obsessed with Marilyn Sheppard. Then, in a lucky stroke, admitting, just sort of conned into saying, my blood is all over the house, and then coming up with a story about how it got there.
By 1959, the Sheppard case was closed, so Eberling was released. Then, in 1987, Richard Eberling is linked to another murder. For Jim Neff, images from the crime are suspiciously familiar.
If you see the photos of the murder scene, she's on a bed, her night clothes are pushed up, her private parts are exposed, and it's bloody splatter all over the walls. So I looked at those and I was just struck by the remarkable similarity between the photos of the Marilyn Sheppard body in the crime scene and Myrtle Frey's body in her crime scene.
Dr. Sam Sheppard described the murderer as bushy-haired. Eberling is not, but he has had a lifelong compulsion for toupees, part of his criminal pathology.
When you asked him to describe the scene and what it looked like, or the property, he was able to give precise and exact descriptions. He was able to tell you details that had not been released publicly. He was able to describe the scene really in a way and with an intensity that only somebody who's actually seeing it can describe.
Sam Reese Sheppard has spent a lifetime trying to forget. But once he learns of the Eberling evidence, he is compelled to resurrect an incident that destroyed his life. He decides to put together a legal challenge against the state of Ohio for the wrongful imprisonment of his father.
Legally speaking, my dad's life was still tainted with this wrongful conviction.
Terry Gilbert is Sam Jr.'s lawyer.
So there's so much here that can be examined. Forensic psychology, forensic trauma, forensic blood spatter, DNA, skin mark wounds. All this, when you take it all together, really points to the fact that somebody else murdered Marilyn Sheppard.
Gilbert decides to tackle the old evidence with the newest in forensic science, DNA profiling. There's a slim hope the DNA in the 40-year-old blood has not degraded over time. The coroner who conducted the original autopsy is dead, but his family has kept Marilyn's samples in a safe. It's a stroke of luck. DNA is best preserved in a dry place. Dr. Mohammed Tahir is the DNA specialist who analyzes the samples. He makes a startling discovery. The vaginal swab from Marilyn's autopsy contains sperm. Tahir lifts DNA from stamps on love letters Sam wrote to Marilyn. He determines for certain it is not Sam Sheppard's sperm. He also tests the mysterious bloodstain on the wall. Does the DNA match Richard Eberling? Tahir chooses his words carefully.
My analysis of DNA does not tell who killed or who did not kill her. The only thing I'm saying is that the evidence does tell that these stains did not originate from Sam or Marilyn.
DNA also confirms that the blood droplets on the stairs did not come from Sam or Marilyn. And the blood stain on Sam's pants is likewise not from him or his wife.
Again, Eberling cannot be excluded.
So we're left with the definite possibility from a scientific standpoint, specifically DNA, that Eberling could well have been the person who attacked Marilyn Sheppard. You have him in that house, we know, a couple of days before, so that he was familiar with it. You have a man who was subsequently convicted of the murder of another individual.
Has a decades-old crime finally been solved? For Neff, the new forensic evidence confirms his version of events back in 1954.
On July 4th, Richard Eberling drove his car over to Huntington Park, 2 blocks from the Sheppard home, and parked it. He crept down to the beach and crawled along the sand up through the back stairs to the Sheppard home. He was obsessed with Marilyn Sheppard. He crept into the house in the dark. He knew the house well as the yard. Here was the object of his obsession.
What am I doing here? I've come here to see you. What do you mean, Richard? No.
Eberling sexually assaults Marilyn. She fights back.
She bit the hand covering her mouth, carried a flashlight with him to get into the house. He was a sadistic, brutal killer who was taking his time. He enjoyed watching people die. He had said that again later in life.
When Sam enters, Eberling strikes him down and flees.
He saw a white form with bushy hair. Eberling, balding, often wore wigs.
In this version, Sam's story of chasing an unknown intruder proves true.
It was Eberling. He chased him to the beach. Eberling dragged him into the water with his t-shirt, either stripping the shirt or using the shirt to clean himself from all the spattered blood, and left Dr. Sam.
Had they put Richard Eberling on trial and tried him for this murder or even interrogated him about it, I have no doubt that he would have been found guilty. All of the evidence points to him.
Sam Reese Sheppard finally believes he has found his mother's true murderer. But his quest to vindicate his father would take one final, dramatic turn. In January 2000, the 3rd trial in the murder of Marilyn Sheppard begins.
Finally, after 45 and a half years, the truth will be told to you in this courtroom. What we need to do, and what we've tried to do all along, is to look at the science. Yes, the forensic science is complicated. Yes, the technology is complicated. It's very difficult, sometimes for juries to understand this.
Bill Mason is the prosecutor who represents the state of Ohio. He prepares his own forensic experts to counter the Sheppard team.
Our experts' analysis says this blood was contaminated from the 50 years. It was just not properly handled. And to come to any kind of conclusion that there's another person in the room is just not well thought.
Cyril Wecht testifies that this murder was the act of a sexual predator, not an enraged husband.
Here's Marilyn with the pajama top pulled up, the pajama bottom down onto one leg. To any casual observer, let alone a trained forensic pathologist or criminalist, one has to immediately think that this is strongly suggestive of a sexual assault.
The state argues that it's textbook domestic homicide.
Why do men beat their wives? If you can answer that, you can solve the world's problems. My suggestion is that I thought maybe he went up that night to have sex with her and she rejected him and he went off.
You sicken me! You disgust me!
I don't know. But something set off that violence that evening.
Mason is determined to prove that Sam Sheppard murdered his wife and bring a 45-year-old mystery to an end. In the 3rd Sam Sheppard trial, modern forensic opinion is applied to half-century-old investigative methods. In the earlier trials, prosecutors had argued that Sam Sheppard faked his injuries. But one forensic expert now contends that this is impossible.
In my opinion, there was no way these wounds could have been self-inflicted, nor could they have been staged. That was the other accusation that was leveled regarding these injuries.
Bill Mason makes a controversial counterclaim that the x-rays are not of Sheppard.
There was claims that he had a broken neck and they had x-rays that showed that there was a broken neck. Well, the coroner at the time, Dr. Gerber, was very unbelieving about the broken neck. So he went to Bayview Hospital and had some separate x-rays made up of Sam's neck and spine, and there was no break in the neck.
Gilbert aims to convince the jury that the psychotic Richard Eberling killed Marilyn, not Sam.
The brutality was the kind of attack that is the earmark of a sexually sadistic psychopath. To look at Dr. Sheppard and to seriously suggest that he would kill his wife in this matter is ludicrous.
Eberling links himself to the crime in a prison interview.
I asked him why he thought that Marilyn Sheppard's pajamas had been pulled down and her bed clothing was disturbed, and he was like, well, I don't know, it couldn't have happened while she was kicking and thrashing.
Dr. Tahir presents the DNA evidence linking Eberling to the scene. Mason says there is too much sample contamination to prove that Eberling was the killer.
DNA was not discovered and used in a courtroom until 1992. And people didn't care for the DNA, and they didn't handle DNA properly. My analysis is, and our experts' analysis is, this blood was contaminated from the 50 years. It was just not properly handled.
Jim Neff was at the trial. He understood Tahir's evidence, but the jury didn't.
The best evidence at the trial was this 1-inch blood spot that was found on the wall just next to Marilyn Sheppard's bed. It's a contact stain. In other words, it didn't fly off the murder weapon because it was too big. This blood was located in a box years later in Dr. Kirk's archives, and it was tested. And of all the DNA tests, this was the best specimen because it was the only one that could be explained by only 2 contributors. And this was an overlap of Marilyn Sheppard's blood and blood that matched Richard Eberling's profile. That point was not made very clearly to the jury. I was there. They didn't understand that. I know that from interviewing them later. So that was a missed opportunity.
Then Mason drops his own forensic bombshell. The original investigation of the blood smear on the wall found it to be type O, not from Sam or Marilyn. But Richard Eberling is type A. Unless Kirk was wrong, there is no explanation for this forensic riddle.
You can argue, gee, it was never absolutely shown to the exclusion of the entire world that the blood and the semen came from Eberling. You certainly can demonstrate that there was a third person. So once you have established that, really, that is the same as saying that Sam Sheppard was not the killer.
The question is, will the jury understand the complex science? After just 4 hours of deliberation, a verdict for the 3rd time in the half-century-old murder mystery.
We, the jury, being duly impaneled, do hereby find for the defendant, the state of Ohio. Ladies and gentlemen, is that your verdict?
Yes, sir.
Sam Sheppard, dead for 30 years, is once again found to be the murderer of his wife. Terry Gilbert is shocked and disillusioned with the verdict.
We had hoped that we could come back to where this all happened and somehow allow them to purge themselves of this dark history, to come clean, so to speak, to own up, to show some accountability, to show some sympathy to this family that was totally destroyed.
Sam Reese Sheppard clings to his belief that his father did not kill his mother.
We are bloodied but unbowed, just as my father was. My father's life was destroyed by the state of Ohio. I will never forget that. I will never let you forget that.
I don't know of any individual or any case that has had 3 trials in this country. It's been up to the Supreme Court of Ohio. It's been up to the Supreme Court of the United States and back. I mean, there is nothing more to do with this case. It's over.
Jim Neff gets one final tantalizing clue when interviewing Richard Eberling in prison.
So we sat down and he was in a wheelchair across from me and I'm talking to Richard Eberling about Marilyn Shepard once again. And he said something, he said, I was in the room and, I just couldn't believe all the blood. And that's in effect what he said to me, and I was stunned. I'm thinking, oh my God, he's put himself in the murder room.
Richard Eberling dies 2 weeks later. Barring another forensic breakthrough, we will never know if Eberling killed Marilyn Shepard, or someone else, or if it was Dr. Sam Shepard all along. A dead man at the bottom of the English Channel leads to an evil criminal mastermind.
Murder is a nasty, nasty business.
Tiny pieces of forensic evidence help investigators close in on a man who nearly got away with murder.
Though the pathologist hadn't said foul play was evident, there was obviously something very much amiss.
And other repulsive crimes.
It was certainly an interesting case with many twists and turns in it.
Police and CSIs follow a twisted path to uncover the secrets behind a dead man with no name. What they discover is a dark, scandalous story.
Prosecution calls Sheena Walker.
About stolen identity, accusations of incest.
Why did you live this fabrication?
And murder. It is July 1996, just off the coast of Devon, near Britain's southwest tip. Veteran fisherman John Kopek and his son are plying the waters for sea bass. They catch more than they bargained for.
We've gone up across a stretch of ground called the Roughs. Hauled, no fish. Shot on again, no fish. And we decided to shorten distance up back to home. And on the last haul we hauled, and we had a body laid on top of the cod end. He was curled up in a fetal position, laid on top of the fish, wearing good clothing, a very expensive watch, damage to the back of his head.
They take their gruesome catch ashore to police. Investigators overlook a clue right under their noses that will take months to discover. Detective Constable Ian Clenahan has been on the job for only 6 days in this sleepy tourist town. A dead body gets the rookie's attention.
It was a weekend, the weekend of the 28th of July. I was in the office and we got a call from our radio control room saying that there was a dead body had been trawled up by a local fishing boat and had been brought into Brixham Harbour. It was a male body, fully dressed, in a shirt, corduroy trousers and shoes. The body itself had no identification on it. There was a tattoo on the back of his hand, which at that stage was undistinguishable. There was a gold chain around his neck, and the pockets were turned out on the trousers, and Rolex watch on his wrist.
The 28-year-old detective says the first task is to identify the body. Gossip spreads, and people in Devon think they know who this Rolex man is. 1 week earlier, a young man had gone missing after a night of drinking in a local pub.
The youngster had been drowned in the bay, I think it was 3 days before, and we assumed they got drunk and gone on a pedalo and sunk it. We assumed it was him, you know, on the assumption there's not too many bodies out there.
But this is no youngster. Hamish Turner was Her Majesty's coroner for Devon and Cornwall in 1996. The autopsy determines that the dead man is at least 40, even 45.
Well, it was a fascination. My officer rang me up and said we've had a body brought in from Brixham. It was fascinating to try and find out what had happened. We did have underclothes made in the United States and a pair of trousers made in Canada, so we knew there was some sort of connection there.
Police decide to check dental records. If the man is British, they'll be on file. Right now, that's the best shot at finding out who this Rolex man is. Dr. Guillen Fernando is the chief pathologist for Devon and Cornwall.
He had some injuries. One of the main injuries he had was a 3-centimeter laceration on the back of his head, which was not a substantial injury, just a skin-deep laceration. No fracture, no brain injury. So I didn't attach much importance to it at that point. He also had 2 other injuries. Again, you quite commonly find bruising on bodies which have been recovered from the water.
Fernando's conclusion leads police to their first theory, that the man was a lone sailor who had lost control of his vessel and was flung overboard. The body is discovered nearly 10 kilometers from shore. Police call in experts to prove that the dead man died at sea. Brian Gallimore was the crime scene manager assigned to the case.
Was this man that we've got in the water fishing 10 miles away, had got swept into the water by a high wave and had found his way down into that particular spot? What would be the tide movements? How would the water move? Could the water have taken him from shore and dropped him there, or taken him and left him in that particular part of the ocean?
Dr. Bob Allen is a specialist on ocean currents.
What I was required to do was to find out how the body got there.
Allen looks at river levels, winds, and tides to see if forces of nature could have carried the man 10 kilometers out to sea. His conclusion? No way.
I was able to show fairly easily that they were non-starters. There hadn't been much rain in the previous week or two, so there wasn't much freshwater flow, and the winds generally were onshore.
Now it's up to the police to figure out how he got there. They ask around looking for a missing sailboat and find nothing. The case is literally put on ice. Dr. Fernando has Rolex man's body stored in a minus 25 degrees Celsius freezer.
We left the mortuary with no real indication of homicide at that time, but sufficient to say that the body was still dealt with as though it was a crime scene, and a crime scene it had to be dealt with as, with the usual stripping of the body and all the clothing put in separate bags and for later analysis if it becomes necessary.
The case is all but closed, but one young cop has a gut feeling that something's not right. He can't let go.
You've got to keep all avenues open, and you've got to really go on the facts that you've got and work out the most likely scenario and then progress your investigation from there, really. So no, at that stage I wasn't thinking certainly anything sinister.
Clenahan turns his attention to the dead man's Rolex. A Rolex self-winding watch stops after about 2 days without movement, even underwater. It gives Clenahan an approximate date of death, July 20th. And the watch offers another clue.
I sought a lot of advice from other people in different fields, and one of the pieces of advice that I got was the fact that the Rolex watch, if it was sent off to the Rolex company, then they could open the watch up, and in fact there is an engraving inside the watch which would tell me if that Rolex watch had been serviced at any stage, and if so, where.
Rolex man now has a serial number, 154402. Ten days pass with no new leads in the mysterious death of Rolex man. Constable Ian Clenahan turns to old-fashioned police work to seek answers.
We get a lot of cargo ships passing this area, so one of the main jobs was to check all the ships that had passed through these shipping lanes. It all drew a blank, all the inquiries with the shipping agents, the ferries, the missing persons. There was nothing really that fitted the bill as to who this person might be.
I mean, the man could have fallen off a boat, he could have fallen off the cliffs fishing, he could have fallen off a cross-channel ferry, which was one line of inquiry. Very often we get divers that are lost. Clearly this wasn't a diver, but there's many, many different ways people can lose their life out to sea.
Then the investigation gets its first big break. Files at Rolex reveal that a man named Ronald Joseph Platt bought the watch in Germany in 1967. But after 30 years, the watch could easily have changed owners. Dental records confirm the dead man is indeed Ronald Platt. His last known address is hundreds of miles to the northeast in Essex. Why he died so far from home is a mystery Ian Clenahan is determined to solve.
A good few hundred miles from here. It's a good five-hour drive from this area. So that in itself was strange. I mean, what could a guy be doing that is based possibly 5 hours away, be doing in the sea off Teignmouth at that time?
Clenahan reaches Sergeant Peter Redman of the Essex Police.
Hello, Sergeant Peter Redman speaking.
Hello, Sergeant. This is Detective Constable Ian Clenahan calling from Torbay down in Devon. I need your help with something.
What can I do for you, Constable?
Yes, 1996, the phone call from Devon and Cornwall, asking if I could visit an address in Chelmsford, Beardsley Drive in Chelmsford.
I've got a body turned up in the channel off Teignmouth, and we've traced him back out your way. Seems he might have lived out there. I wonder if you could drop round.
Sure. What's the name and address?
Platt. Ronald Platt. And here's the address.
Went to the address. It's an empty property by now. So some inquiries with the council revealed the landlord's details, and I went across and saw him. He said that the property had been vacated a few weeks or a few months previously. All he had as a forwarding address was an address in Wood and Water. And a name, David Davis.
Hello.
Hello. I'm looking for David Davis.
Speaking.
Are you an acquaintance of a man named Ronald Platt?
Yes, I know Ron. Who's calling, please?
It's Sergeant Peter Redman, sir. I don't want to discuss matters on the phone. Can I come to see you?
That really isn't convenient for me at the moment. Where are you? I can come to the police station if you like. What's this about?
Not to alarm you, Mr. Davis, but a body has turned up at sea off Devon, and it may be your friend, Mr. Platt.
Oh, my God.
Can you come to the station?
What about this afternoon at 2?
That would be fine. Thank you, Mr. Davis. I'll see you then. Bye-bye. Mr. Davis. Sergeant Peter Redman.
When I met David Davis at the police station, he struck me as a very well-to-do, very confident man, dressed casually, but very well. The clothes were of good quality.
I'm sorry to inconvenience you like this. It must be very difficult.
He held himself with an air of authority, and he came across as a really nice chap, the sort of person you'd happily meet in the pub and sit and have a drink with.
A fisherman in Devon pulled a body out of the sea about a month ago. The man was wearing a Rolex watch, which apparently belonged to Ronald Platt. You say you knew him.
Yes, I did. I've known him for several years now. He was a good friend of mine. Now, last I saw of Ron, he was about to leave for France to start a TV repair business there. In fact, I'd loaned him.
He explained how Ron had decided to go across to France, to La Rochelle area in France, and that he was going to assist him in setting up business.
When was this, Mr. Davis?
June, I believe. Yes, it was June.
Did he leave an address in France?
No, he didn't. He really wasn't sure where he was going to end up. But his mail was being forwarded to my house.
And what did you receive?
Nothing, really. No.
And he couldn't assist with how Ron could have ended up in the sea off Devon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Davis. If you think of anything else, could you give me a call? Here's my card. Anything at all.
I think I do have a picture of Ron around somewhere, and if I can find it, I'll send it to you.
That would be helpful.
It's the least I can do.
We'll keep you informed, Mr. Davis.
Redmond calls Clenahan and tells him Davis has little to offer. The lead has run dry. But the rookie is determined to crack the case.
I think in any investigator's mind, you don't like closing things down until you know exactly what has happened. And I was very keen to establish exactly what the cause of death was.
The next clue comes from the dead man himself. Ronald Platt's tattoo. Clenahan learns that Platt loved Canada and that the tattoo is the national emblem, the maple leaf. Clenahan then discovers that Platt met Davis through Platt's girlfriend, Elaine Boyes.
Oh, I have something for you, too.
Turns out Davis played a role in Platt's Canadian connection.
Go ahead, open it.
5 years earlier.
I don't believe it. It is what you wanted, or at least you said you did.
Yes, it's just that it's so very generous of you, Mr. Davis, and so unexpected.
Go ahead, read it.
2 air tickets to Canada. I'm in shock. I really am. We're finally going and never coming back.
I'll drink to that.
Elaine leaves Ron after just 3 months in Canada and never sees him again. Platt is desperate, lonely, and broke. These facts lead Clenahan to a new theory. Maybe Ron Platt simply came back to England to die. Forensic science supports the theory that Ron Platt was alive when he hit the water.
I could say that he did not die from the injury to his head because there's no skull fracture and the brain didn't show any evidence of injury. If it was inflicted during life, it would have stunned him, it would have made him unconscious, but I'm pretty sure that injury didn't kill him. And I also know that he was alive when he went into the water because he showed signs of drowning.
Fernando believes Platt has been in the water for just over a week. What he doesn't know is how far he might have drifted in that time. Police turn back to tidal expert Bob Allen for help.
The police asked me to look at 2 situations. Could the body have arrived at the site it was found by natural forces? And the other thing they were concerned about is, would he have moved under the forces of the sea during the time that he was missing?
Allen consults the tidal charts and assures investigators that ocean currents were not strong enough to have moved Platt's body. The question now is, how did he get there? The case has gone cold, but the rookie cop Clenahan remains magnetized by the Rolex man mystery. He calls Peter Redmond in Essex one more time.
Pete, I'm a bit embarrassed by this, but I've lost the mobile number of that American Davis. I'm trying to close the file up on this case. I wonder if you could dig it out for me.
Well, no, I don't have it, but no, I do remember the address. It's a place out in the country. It's called Little London Farm. It's only a 20-minute drive from me. I'll go out and see him if you like.
Oh, that'd be great, Pete. Cheers. The boss really wants me to stop working on this Platt case, so just ask Davis if there's anything he could do to help us, and we'll call it a day.
Done.
So I drove over to Wood and Water.
Dumb luck leads Redmond to a twist no one expects.
As you can see, it's a narrow little lane. These 2 houses, at the time, they didn't have their names above them. So I knocked at this one, Little London House. Transpired the house next door was the one I wanted. Anyway, I spoke to the people at Little London House. I said, oh, after David Davis. Oh, David Davis doesn't live there. It's a Ron Platt. So my immediate thought was, well, if Ron Platt's living there, who's in the mortuary in Devon? I had a cup of tea with the elderly couple next door for some time, and they were telling me how that the person they knew as Ron Platt lived next door with his wife.
Not exactly sure what he does. The money seems to be absolutely no object. He has a lovely young wife, half his age, and 2 little children. They almost never leave the house.
What's his wife's name?
Noelle, and the children are Emily and Lily. They're away right now, up in York, I believe. They're away a lot these days. They also keep a lovely yacht down in Devon, where they spend most of the summer. Oh, I said something wrong?
Oh, probably not. If you don't mind, I'd like you to make no mention of my visit here. I don't want Mr. Platt to become alarmed that police have been involved.
Absolutely. Anything we can do to help.
Thank you both so much.
Why is David Davis masquerading as Ronald Platt? Now the police have a new mystery to unravel.
Hey, Ian.
Hello, Sergeant.
I just got back from David Davis's house.
Armed with new information, Sergeant Peter Redmond calls Ian Clenahan in Devon.
Neighbours were. Turns out Davis is going by the name Ron Platt.
What?
Yeah, that's what I said too. He's Ron Platt up here in Essex. I checked it out at the hospital where his kid was born. Her birth name is Emily Platt.
Well, this doesn't make sense.
You won't be closing this Rolex case just yet.
Look, I'll have to talk to the boss.
Yeah, keep in touch.
I'll call you back, okay? Chief, had a bit of a development with the Platt case. Turns out that David Davis has been using...
The police decide to reopen the Rolex Man mystery case.
I mean, that's mistaken identity as well.
They discover that Davis has been signing checks using Platt's name. They also learn that Davis's wife is about 20 years old, at least 30 years younger than he is. They have 2 girls, a 3-year-old and a 10-month-old. Hospital records show that both children were registered with the last name Platt.
Although the pathologist hadn't said foul play was evident, based on the fact that he was living the identity of Ron Platt, there was obviously something very much amiss. Why was this man doing that? Posing as a dead person, effectively. One of the first thoughts was to arrest for an offence under the Official Secrets Act, actually, in relating to the false registration of the baby's birth.
We checked all his utility bills, his gas, his telephone, his electric, his water, and all of these bills were being paid in the name of Ronald Platt. We have Mr. Ronald Platt in Torbay Hospital, and we also have Mr. Ronald Platt living alive and well in Wood and Walter in Essex. And we then, at this stage, had to find out exactly what was going on.
They're away right now, up in York, I believe.
The neighbors have given police their most valuable clue.
They have a lovely yacht in Devon.
That the man they know as Ronald Platt keeps a sailboat in Devon.
Have I said anything wrong?
Oh, I've hit it many a time. Oh, yeah.
Did David Davis murder Ronald Platt?
First we find out he's got a boat in Devon. Then we find out that he, in fact, or certainly his phone, was in Devon at the crucial time. So all of these added up to a very suspicious incident which warranted more investigation.
More damning evidence comes from Ron Platt's ex-girlfriend, Elaine Boyes.
Yeah, that's him.
When did you last see him?
Elaine Boyes thought it quite strange that Mr. Davis didn't actually mention to her that her ex-boyfriend had been found drowned off the sea in Devon.
That's not possible.
I'm sorry?
I spoke to Mr. Davis just last week. He didn't mention anything about Ron being dead. He said that Ron was in France.
Well, he's known since July.
Do you think that Mr. Davis might have had something to do with this? I can't imagine it.
No, Miss Boyes, we don't think so. We're really treating it as an accident. Don't jump to any conclusions.
Clenahan gets Davis's cell phone records and learns he was in Devon the week of Platt's murder. Eyewitnesses attest to seeing Davis and Platt at a local inn. Police decide it's all the evidence they need. On October 31st, 1996, Peter Redman arrests David Davis on suspicion of murder.
He recognised me straight away. I said, I'm arresting you, Mr. Davis, on suspicion of the murder of Ron Platt. And he said, fine, what happens now? And when the officers searched him, in one pocket he was David Davis with all the identity documents, and in the other pocket he was Ron Platt.
They also arrest his 20-year-old wife, suspecting her as an accomplice. Baby Lily is just 10 months old, so she must accompany her mother to the station.
Good girl.
The toddler, Emily, is left with a neighbor.
I love you. I'll be back, I promise, okay?
Police will later discover that Noel has packed a surprise in the toddler's bag.
And there were some gold bars and several £1,000s in cash, which is just what a 3-year-old needs for a few nights away.
British law provides police 36 hours to gather enough evidence to charge David Davis with murder. It is now a race against time. They cannot prepare themselves for the grotesque twists they will uncover. The woman known as Noelle Davis throws British police an unexpected curve. She is posing as Elaine Boyes, the ex-girlfriend of the murdered Ronald Platt.
Let's go over this one more time, Noelle.
I told you already. We moved from Long Island, New York in 1990.
And what were you doing with Elaine Boyes' ID?
We needed British ID to get health care for the children.
How old are you, Noelle?
21.
And your husband?
50.
And where exactly did you meet him? He's not your husband, is he?
Noelle finally breaks. She is not David Davis's wife. She is his daughter. Peter Redman recalls how the investigation froze at that moment.
Obviously, the questions of parentage of the two children became foremost in my mind. But the decision was made that the murder was the primary offence that we were investigating. And the issue of the children's parentage would be a matter that would be dealt with later at the appropriate time and in the appropriate place.
Meanwhile, David Davis will only say one thing.
Once again, Mr. Davis, this is a whole lot easier if you cooperate with us.
I want to see my solicitor.
At Davis's house, police seek clues to a murder. Instead, they find £30,000 in cash, 17 gold bars, and safety deposit keys that suggest their suspected murderer is a millionaire. They also find compromising photographs of David Davis and Noel. It appears Davis may be the father of his daughter's children. The police have stumbled into a twisted world that may involve theft, incest, and finally, murder. Investigators discover a GPS. It is new technology in 1996, so it is sent to the manufacturer to see if it holds further clues. The cold case is now white hot. The trail leads to the fisherman who caught Ron Platt in his net 10 weeks earlier. He reveals evidence that was overlooked when police took Ron Platt's body from the nets.
That was a small anchor, small plough anchor. We didn't discover that until after the body had been removed from the boat and we were cleaning the nets out.
Unfortunately for police, Kopek has given the anchor away.
Another fisherman was walking along the quay and he said, "I've just bought a speedboat. That'd just suit my speedboat. Can I have it?" I said, "Help yourself, Derek."
It takes police a month to track it down. It is sent to forensic experts who may be able to see if the anchor holds hidden clues.
That was a turning point for me in the investigation because as soon as they mentioned an anchor in the same net, I found that of extreme interest. It was possibly coincidental, but if we've got a suspicion that a person has been drowned and foul play is suspected, then what better instrument is there to hold a guy on the bottom of the ocean than an anchor weight?
Ocean expert Bob Allen is certain that the anchor helped sink Ronald Platt.
At this stage in the investigation, the police realised that he may have been weighted down with a 10-pound anchor on the seabed near to where he was found. They were concerned about was whether there was any possibility he might have been moved by the ocean currents. To investigate that, I needed to study the ocean currents in the area that were occurring during that 10-day period. And I worked out the direction and the magnitude of those forces. They varied from day to day, they varied from tide to tide.
Allen is certain. With an anchor weighing him down, Platt could not move far from where he was dumped. Pathologist Guillen Fernando recalls the wound on the back of Ronald Platt's head.
Once we realized that the anchor had been used to weigh down the body, and the deceased was still alive when he went into the water and drowned, there was only one possibility, that he had been stunned by being hit on the head with a heavy blunt weapon, sufficient to knock him senseless, but not to kill him outright. And then obviously the anchor has been attached and it's been dropped in the water.
But can forensic science prove it? Fernando gets to work. Ronald Platt, frozen for more than 100 days, is brought out to thaw. Investigators give Dr. Guillen Fernando an anchor identical to the one caught in John Kopek's fishing nets. He makes a critical discovery.
He had 2 injuries on his leg, one near his hip, the other close to his knee. And when he placed the anchor against the body along his thigh, you could see the points where the anchor would have been rubbing against the skin. And at those points, we had these 2 bruises, and that were exact length of the shank of the anchor.
Fernando reports his discovery to police. Investigators now turn to more forensic experts to prove that David Davis killed Ronald Platt. The anchor found in the nets with Ron Platt's body is sent to the UK's elite Forensic Science Services lab. Dr. Ian Gray is assigned to the case.
He was trying to associate the anchor that had been trawled up in the same net with Mr. Platt Obviously, the likely contact points there would be the trousers and the belt that he was wearing at the time the body was recovered. So we looked to see whether there was a transfer of material from the belt, namely the leather, to the anchor.
Gray first has the belt examined under a conventional microscope.
There was a definite kink in the belt, and the upper and lower surfaces were folding over, which would suggest that some kind of force or some pressure had actually been exerted in that area. When the inside of the belt in those areas was examined, it was noticeable that there were quite a lot of sort of scratches or abrasions in that area. Looking at that under low-power microscope, you could see that those abrasions were in fact translucent deposits that had actually been added to the belt.
Gray orders the belt scanned with an electron microscope, a high-tech device that can determine if the abrasions came from the zinc-coated anchor.
When a sample gives off X-rays, these X-rays have certain energies, and the system is calibrated across the full energy range.
Jones puts a sample from the belt into the microscope. The device scans for invisible evidence of metallic residue.
If I pull zinc up here, you can see that the two components we have, here and here, the energies correspond to the position of metallic zinc.
The belt is laced with zinc in one particular place, alongside Ron Platt's left hip. Crime scene analyst Brian Gallimore conducts an impromptu experiment.
Once I saw the anchor, I could see the type of anchor that it was, then it was very easy to slip inside my belt that I wore on a daily basis. And once it slipped through there, it actually kinked the belt and hung nicely over my left hip. The end of the anchor, which went and landed or was positioned just above the knee on the left-hand side, would have matched the bruising on the deceased. So this was a highly significant find.
Then the anchor itself is examined. Months later, the forensics tell the same story.
When you look at the anchor itself, you can see that at the base of the shank, there are brown deposits there, which would suggest that some material had actually been in contact with that part of the anchor.
All forensic evidence is circumstantial, but Gray's findings are compelling.
It's quite unusual to look at an anchor and find deposits of leather on it. If you were to pick up a substantial number of anchors, you'd probably find that none of them actually had deposits of leather attached to them.
David Davis's yacht, the Lady Jane, is scoured for more evidence. CSIs find just 3 human hairs.
Right, the Lady Jane, that was the #1 crime scene. That was the murder scene as we know it today. And then it was brought back to our force area and held, and eventually we took it to the Forensic Science Service at Chepstow, and myself and other officers, forensic officers, then made a very detailed examination of the inside and the outside of that vessel to put Platt on that yacht. There was a degree of hair and fibres that we were able to seize from soft furnishings within the galley of the vessel.
Colin Dark is the scientist assigned to the case.
We recovered those hairs and we formed the view that they'd been pulled out of someone's scalp. We cut off the roots and sent those for DNA analysis. The DNA test gave us a match for that tuft that we found at the scene to Ronald Platt's reference DNA sample. Match probability of 1 in 3 million.
The dragnet is tightening around David Davis. The fact that CSIs have found no blood is no surprise to Dark.
Not to find Ronald Platt's blood on the boat is not an unexpected result. Someone can receive a blow to the head, render them unconscious, so they're disabled and can be then manhandled off the boat, weighed down, whatever.
might leave the small tuft of hairs behind, but it doesn't split the skin, so there's no bleeding and no blood gets left behind. They're knocked out.
It came up very empty, yes it did, but as we know, not all injuries will produce profuse amounts of blood. So the absence of blood does not mean there's been no crime. It'd be very nice to find lots of blood and be able to prove that is the blood of the deceased, but it's not always possible, and it certainly wasn't on this occasion.
Now investigators believe they have all the pieces of the puzzle.
Ron, can you hand me that bag on the deck there?
Sure. All right, David. Yeah, oh, Jesus, bloody heavy.
Yeah.
What's in it?
Oh, just some stuff I picked up in Dartmouth. Sailing things, you know, anchor, rope.
It's good to be back here. Never thought I'd say that.
But I missed being here. It's good to see you back on your feet again.
Not quite. At least getting there. And I must say again, David, I can't thank you enough for all your help, especially these last few days.
It's nothing.
No, really. You're the only friend I have. I just have a feeling, you know? This time things will be different.
Then the final breakthrough. Technicians download the last date, time, and position from Davis's GPS. July 20th, 1996, 9:00 p.m. Just under 4 miles from where the fisherman snagged Ronald Platt's body, and within the timeline left by the stopped Rolex watch on the dead man's arm. Police now believe they have enough evidence to go to trial. There is a final unexpected twist. Interpol informs British police that their suspect is not David Davis at all. His name is Albert Walker. He is a Canadian. The real David Davis is a car salesman whose identity Walker stole in 1990. Now the story gets even more bizarre. Noelle Davis is really Sheena Walker. She was 15 when she went on the run with her father. In the 1980s, Walker posed as a financial advisor and stole millions of dollars from small-town people in Canada.
Wife lost the business, our life saving, and the house. As I said before, if I had a gun, I would have shot him. He was a handsome guy, well-dressed, shiny shoes, and the wife loved him.
By 1990, Walker was running out of people to steal from. His wife of 22 years was starting to get suspicious. He moved $3 million out of the country and hopped on a plane to Europe with Sheena. Once in England, Walker convinced Ronald Platt to move to Canada.
And never coming back.
I'll drink to that.
Platt authorized a rubber stamp of his signature. Walker also got copies of Elaine Boy's ID, so that his daughter Sheena could assume her identity. Platt stays in Canada for 3 years before he returns to the UK. He looks up his old friend Walker, aka David Davis, aka Ronald Platt. Platt's unexpected return is a threat to Walker's new identity. Enough of a threat to kill him, the investigators believe. Now it's time to see if a jury agrees. Albert Walker languishes in prison for over a year and a half. In June 1998, he gets his day in court.
Mr. Barton, for the Crown.
Thank you, my lord. The prosecution calls Miss Sheena Walker.
The Crown's star witness is none other than Sheena Walker.
Do you remember Saturday, July 20th?
Yes, I do.
Did your father go sailing that day?
Yes, he did.
And what time did he return?
Later on in the evening, 10 o'clock approximately.
Did you have a discussion?
I asked him how the sailing was, what the weather was like, that sort of thing. He was very tired, so we just went to bed. Is that you?
Yeah,
How was sailing?
fine.
Lovely day.
You know, I'm feeling really tired. I'm just gonna go upstairs to bed.
Good night, then.
Why did you live this fabrication? That you were your father's wife?
Well, my father suggested that, because there was a small child, we should present ourselves as husband and wife.
The jury has come to try a murderer. Nothing could prepare them for the sickening suggestion of incest surrounding Albert and Sheena Walker.
Your father
After a week of testimony from investigators and forensic experts, Albert Walker himself takes the stand.
We were as husband and wife. She was so embarrassed that she was a single girl and wanted to have the appearance that she wasn't single.
And the child's name?
Emily Jane Platt.
Then it's the Crown's turn.
And you called Sheena what?
Noel.
And she called you what?
Daddy.
Well, that must have raised a few eyebrows.
Why?
Because you were living as husband and wife.
Emily called me Daddy, and Sheena called me Daddy. Occasionally, she would call me Ron, but when Ron was there, she would call me Daddy or Dad.
The subject finally turns to murder.
Do you acknowledge the motive you had for ridding yourself of Ronald Platt? The real Ronald Platt?
What motive?
Did you not recognize him as a threat to your future life?
No.
That he might jeopardize your money and your liberty?
I did not murder Ronald Platt. He was a friend of mine.
It all comes down to the forensic evidence. The anchor, which left a telltale mark on Platt's body. The GPS, placing Walker's yacht at the scene. The cell phone calls and credit card bills proving Walker was in Devon. Platt's hair, found on the yacht. And finally, the Rolex, establishing the time of death.
That man is a murderer. He executed Ronald Platt with a degree of planning that I would call chilling.
We are not here to determine what you may think of Albert Walker as a man. We are here to decide what conclusions you may safely reach based on the Crown's evidence. How does the Crown's evidence stand up against its theory? The Crown's case has many fatal flaws. Where is the burden of proof?
The jury deliberates for just 2 hours. The verdict, guilty.
This was a callous, premeditated killing designed to eliminate a man you had used for your own selfish ends. He became a danger to you, and he had to die. You are an intelligent and ruthless man who poses a serious threat to anyone who stands in your way. And I shall have regard to that when making recommendations to the Home Secretary for the length of your sentence. You may go down.
Albert Walker is sentenced to life in prison. To this day, he proclaims his innocence. A forensic trail that began with a Rolex and ended with a GPS revealed his brilliant murder plot. He nearly got away with a near-perfect crime.
Yeah, Walker was a very unfortunate person, but we were very fortunate in as much as we recovered the anchor, the GPS system that put his boat out at a particular time. Everything that, or most everything that we pursued came back with very positive evidence. And if we hadn't dealt with that evidence positively and effectively, then yeah, Walker could be a free man today.
Sheena Walker has a new life in Canada. The paternity of her 2 daughters has never been made public. In 2005, Albert Walker is permitted to return to Canada to serve out his sentence. His reason? To be closer to his family. August 1988. A killer stalks the Mourmelon region of France. 8 young men disappear in just 8 years. Most are military cadets. Officials dismiss the men as deserters. Family members fight for the real story to be told.
I still think we were cheated all along, cheated of justice, robbed of it.
One dogged police officer refuses to let the case go.
Je me souviens parfaitement avoir dit.
And I remember very well saying to my captain,
celui-là, je le
we've got
sens
our
bien.
man.
A small corner of northern France becomes known as the Triangle of Death. What is happening to the young cadets? Several different theories are uncovered. Different suspects are identified. Tireless detective work. Tiny pieces of dirt and hair lead police to a shocking conclusion. And in the end, the case takes one last startling turn. August 8th, 1987. In a quiet patch of countryside near the town of Alencourt, France, farmer Marcel Lant takes his dog for a walk. It's a daily ritual that today will have a grisly ending.
Oh mon Dieu!
The body has no wallet, no money, no clues to his name. Jacques Buxa, head of the violent crime division of the gendarmes, is assigned to the case.
On était en présence d'un cadavre dont on ignorait
We found a body
l'identité,
with no ID,
on ignorait d'où
so
il
we
venait,
had no
où il
idea
allait,
who he was,
on n'avait
where he
rien,
was from, where he
si
was
ce n'est
going.
qu'on savait que c'était
We
une
had
jeune
nothing.
personne de sexe masculin.
All we knew was that this was a young man
Visiblement,
whose
il y avait
body
des traces de
showed
coups.
traces of violence
Un
and had
trou
been
avait été
buried
creusé
in a
et le
shallow
corps
grave.
recouvert à la terre.
So
Donc,
this
il
was murder.
s'agissait d'un meurtre ou d'un assassinat.
The first theory is that this crime is a petty robbery gone wrong. The body quickly buried to hide the evidence. The shallow grave is only 5 meters from a local road and just off a major French highway, the A26. It is one of the few wooded bits of land in the area. The body is taken to the morgue at the nearby St. Quentin Hospital.
We have a young male, Caucasian, in his late teens or early 20s. We can see the presence of some wounds on the posterior of the right ear, indicating the body was likely buried 4 to 5 days ago.
The body was buried in early August. It's not badly decayed, which helps to discover how the victim died.
We can see a horizontal rounded strangulation groove, less than a centimeter wide.
Une trace de strangulation était parfaitement visible.
The strangulation marks were perfectly visible. It was clearly a violent death.
Qu'il s'agissait
But we
d'une mort
still didn't
violente,
understand
mais
why
on ne
he
pouvait
was
pas
killed.
encore affirmer à ce
Or by
moment-là de
whom.
quoi il s'agissait exactement.
Immediately, suspicion falls on a gang that is targeting hitchhikers in the north of France.
Les renseignements fournis
We
nous ont
had
permis
information about a gang of
d'identifier et
thieves,
localiser
who
ces
they
personnes.
were,
Nous les avons-
where they
nous
lived.
avons entendus,
We
nous
requested
avons
a search
procédé à des
warrant,
perquisitions
then
à leur
raided their
domicile.
houses.
Mais les
But we
renseignements
learned
qui nous sont
quickly that they
fournis
had nothing to
nous
do
ont vite
with the
démontré
case.
que celle-ci n'avait rien à voir avec la disparition.
The gang members are thieves, but not killers. Their alibis are solid. The investigation moves on. The question is, why are there no signs of struggle? There is no damage to the internal organs, no other marks to the face, no wounds on the head. How could the victim have been killed without fighting back?
There is a small bruise, roughly 2 centimeters wide on the right arm.
Strange small wounds on each arm could explain why there were no other injuries on the body.
C'est à ce moment-là qu'on a
At this
constaté
point, we
que la
realized
victime
the victim
présentait
had
des
bruising on
hématomes
the
au
arms
niveau
and
des
wrists,
avant-bras, qu'elle avait
and this
des traces au
bruising would
niveau
be
des poignets,
consistent
ce
with
qui
being
laissait
tied
présumer
up.
qu'elle avait été entravée.
The marks lead to a second theory. This wasn't an accidental death during a robbery, but a premeditated crime. The victim was bound first, then strangled.
L'identification du corps
Identification of
est
the body
primordiale.
was of the utmost importance.
Pour travailler
Without
sur
a
une
name,
personne sans nom,
a
c'est
case such as
chercher
this is like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Who was this man? Where was he going? Answers to these questions will help find the killer. Dental records are a vital tool in helping identify unknown victims. In this case, police find one tooth is missing. Another is split in two. None of it was caused during the murder. In the end, a small business card found near the body helps point police in the right direction. It leads them to Caroline O'Keefe in Ireland.
My daughter got a telephone call in her work in London to say that was our boss missing. It was our boss's business card had been found in France in a field. And the police was checking to see was our boss okay. And she said, yes, he is. He's at a meeting. And they told her a body had been found in France. And her boss's business card was on it. And she said, that's my brother.
The body is identified as Trevor O'Keefe, an Irishman who was touring the north of France. He was 3 months short of his 20th birthday.
And we got there 10:30 at night, pouring rain, winter time. And we went in and we asked the police to show us the body, and we identified who we were by passports and whatever. And they showed us Trevor's runners and his watch. And they showed us the photographs where they took Trevor out of the ground by stages. But it was Trevor.
O'Keefe was staying with his friends in the city of Poligny. On August 3rd, 5 days before his body was found, he told his friends he was going to hitchhike to Calais. The route he was going to take would have brought him right by St. Quentin. Booksin quickly develops a dark theory of what happened and calls in some help. Captain Joël Vaillant is the head of the Special Investigations Unit of the Gendarmerie. His mandate is to modernize the techniques of the gendarmes, the police who patrol the French countryside.
L'essentiel, c'est que nous étions à cette époque-là, en
1988, we're just at the beginning of DNA. The technology that they were beginning to use in the United States was not really being used yet in Europe.
N'était encore pas très implanté dans l'Europe.
Vaillant is investigating another gruesome crime, one startlingly similar to the O'Keefe case. 5 years earlier, the body of Olivier Donner was found. He was buried in a wooded area near Mailly-le-Camp. It's just 130 kilometers from where Trevor O'Keefe is found. Donner had been buried for more than a month when he was found. Decomposition had set in. The head was little more than teeth and bones.
On voyait bien que les conditions dans lesquelles
It was
Olivier
obvious
Donner
from
était
Donner's
découvert,
condition
sa
how
mort
he
ne
was
pouvait
found,
être que
that
criminelle.
this could be
On
nothing
peut
but a
penser que
criminal attack.
les larves, les
Because
insectes
his head was
ayant attaqué
infested
la
with
partie
worms and
haute
insects,
du corps,
there had been a lot of blood
c'est
trapped
qu'il y a eu
there, so he
un
died
amas,
by
un flux
either
de sang
smothering
sur
or
cette partie.
strangulation.
On pouvait
One or
penser
the
que la
other.
mort était due par étouffement,
So
strangulation.
now we have a connection with
Et à ce
O'Keefe.
moment-là, nous
It
faisons le
reinforces
lien
our belief
avec
that
Trevor
O'Keefe's
O'Keefe,
death
ce
was
qui
a
vient
criminal
conforter
case too.
l'hypothèse criminelle.
If there is a killer stalking northern France, Vaillant believes it's only a matter of time before he strikes again. September 1987. Weeks pass without another murder. But Captain Joël Vaillant fears it is only a matter of time until another body is found buried in the woods of France. Then a killer is caught in Martigny, Switzerland. Michel Pirie has kidnapped, raped, and murdered 4 young hitchhikers, including one in southern France.
So tell me a bit more about your story, please.
Yes. I was looking for attractive people.
He's Swiss, but it's just a few hundred kilometers from the Swiss border to where O'Keefe and Donner were killed. Vaillant rushes to Martigny to watch Pirie's interrogation. It's a chilling encounter.
I was ready every time I picked someone up. If I liked them, I took them to an isolated place and I killed them. How?
O'Keefe was buried in a shallow grave. So was Donner. But all of Pirie's victims were savagely beaten, then burned. Pirie's alibi for early August is also airtight. He's clearly not the killer that Vaillant's looking for.
Donc, ce qui est intéressant, c'est que
What's intriguing is when he's questioned, he's asked, "Why did you kill your victims?" And his answer
on
is,
s'aperçoit
"I
que
didn't have any
la
choice.
réponse,
I didn't want to get
je ne
caught."
voulais pas être arrêté, je n'avais pas d'autre choix. Et donc, on se retrouvait dans la construction intellectuelle que nous étions, nous, face à un pervers sexuel.
So
et
faced
que,
with his mindset,
à l'issue
we're
de ces
clearly
actes,
up against a serial
bien,
killer,
il n'avait
a
d'autre
sexual
choix que
pervert.
d'éliminer sa victime.
Based on
Donc,
Pirie's
nous avions
logic,
dans la même année
our killer has
une
no
disparition
choice.
militaire.
He has to kill.
Nous avions Trevor O'Keefe
In
qui
one
était
year, we have
assassiné,
2 murders,
et
Donner
l'arrestation
and
d'un
O'Keefe.
suspect
And after
qui
Pirie's
démontrait le
interrogation,
serial killer
I
qui
knew
agissait
I was
seul,
dealing with
et
a
donc on pouvait
similar
penser
profile.
qu'il y avait une corrélation avec le nôtre.
Vaillant is more convinced than ever that the murders of Trevor O'Keefe and Olivier Donner are linked. And he thinks the trail of bodies is even longer.
C'est à ce moment-là que je vais apprendre qu'il y a eu
I
antérieurement
find out
d'autres
other young
disparitions
men have gone
de jeunes
missing.
gens, mais qui
Young men
étaient
who were in the
militaires
military,
et qui étaient
who were
considérés
considered
comme
deserters.
déserteurs. Ce que nous allons faire,
I ask that we
nous
reopen
allons
all these
réouvrir,
cases,
je vais demander à ce
all
que
of these
l'on
men we
réouvre
call
l'ensemble
the
des dossiers
disappeared of Montmelon.
des disparus de Montmelon, car je n'ai jamais voulu utiliser cette terminologie de désertion,
I never
car elle a une
wanted to call
connotation
them deserters
administrative
because it
et
has an
pénale.
implication, a legal
Pour les
meaning
familles,
for the families.
La désertion,
Desertion
c'est
is a
un acte
voluntary
volontaire de
act
vouloir
of
quitter
leaving
l'armée.
the army.
Est-ce qu'ils
Did these
avaient
young men
manifesté
leave
cette volonté
voluntarily?
de
Are they
quitter l'armée,
deserters?
de
Or did they
déserter, qu'on
disappear
appelle, ou
in
bien
much more
avaient-ils
sinister
disparu
circumstances?
dans des conditions qu'il convenait d'expliciter?
Patrice Dubois, Serge Havet, Manuel Carvalho, Pascal Sergent, Patrick Gash. All are young military cadets. All were hitchhiking. And since January of 1980, they've all disappeared. 4 of the 5 were stationed at the military base in Mourmelon. The 5th was at the nearby base in Mailly-le-Camp. Except for Olivier Donner, none of those who have gone missing have been found. There are no bodies, no evidence of a crime. The cadets are all part of France's compulsory military service. At the time, every 18-year-old French man had to serve 12 months in the military. Most upper-class teenagers find a way out. But lower-class young men found themselves in bases like Mourmelon.
The army was pathetic from beginning to end. They didn't want to hear about disappearances. They called the men deserters. They never spoke with the families. The army dismissed them completely. The army treated the families badly. It treated the justice system badly. Because these men were poor and from every corner of France, they didn't have the resources to make themselves heard.
One other young man also disappears near Mourmelon, a young rocket enthusiast who was heading to the base for a demonstration. Patrice Denis disappeared in 1985. He wasn't in the military, and his family is not letting his disappearance be ignored.
We spent a week where he was last seen. With friends, we beat the bushes, searching the area. And people there asked me if I knew there had been other disappearances. The cadets were missing. So then we became very worried, very concerned. And my parents began to write letters to everyone, the Minister of the Interior, the Minister of Defense, because it was so near to the base at Mourmelon. And the battle began.
To the relief of the families, Vaillant pursues his theory that a serial killer is at work. He asks French psychiatrist Jean-Luc Pleuy to piece together a profile of who the killer might be.
The theory was that this man was a military man and still in the service, that he had lots of frustration either before or during his career, and he was taking out this frustration through these violent acts.
Jim Wright, who would eventually be drawn into the investigation, is a profiling expert who worked with the FBI.
Serial killers are driven by fantasy, and there's really no limit to what a person's fantasy can be. And if they fantasize about a certain type of person, that may be the type of person that they're going to target if they have access to them.
All of the victims disappeared on Thursday or Friday night, several on the same road. The families and the media begin calling this area the Triangle of Death.
A serial killer is a predator. He's going hunting. He has his weapons and his locations where he'll find his prey.
Like Patrice Denis, Trevor O'Keefe was not in the military, but he has a similar build and is a similar age to all the cadets who disappeared. He also vanishes near one of the bases. Trevor O'Keefe is added to the list of victims.
So guys, we're going to concentrate our research around Mourmelon. It's right there, okay? What we know is that apparently the victims disappeared on the same road, which is that one from
the gendarmes begin looking for suspects who fit the early profile they've assembled. With such a strong link to local military bases, Vaillant begins his search there. More than 2,000 people near the base at Mourmelon are questioned. Hitchhikers are sought out too. The profile suggests that the killer is sexually attracted to his victims, that he is choosing them based on their looks. But the only bodies that have been found, Donner and O'Keefe, show no signs of sexual assault.
What is sexually gratifying to a serial killer is not defined the way you and I as normal people would define sexual gratification and sexual pleasure. One strong driving force of a serial killer is a need to exercise control over people. And when you think about it, the ultimate control that you have over somebody is a control over whether they live or die.
Then, in December 1987, evidence points the investigation in quite a different direction.
Things began moving very quickly when they found Trevor O'Keefe's knapsack in the area around Lake Dur. It's not far from Mourmelon. And that knapsack is the link, a strong link between O'Keefe and the other young men who had disappeared. And when you look at the young Irishman's physique, you realize how much he resembles a military cadet.
Police show pictures of O'Keefe to people in towns nearby. Was O'Keefe driven through these towns on the last day of his life? Police investigate Jean-Pierre McNabb, a local man who had recently separated from his wife.
One of the theories we worked on was to confirm the story of a woman who told us her husband had left the marital home for Poligny. We knew that Trevor O'Keefe was in Poligny. With both of them there in early August, we had to check to see if the two had crossed paths.
Before he left his house, McNabb had threatened his wife. When the gendarme tracked him down, a cord was found in his car that he could not explain. Blood is also found on McNabb's shirt, blood that is the same type as that of Trevor O'Keefe. McNabb is not in the military, and there's no history of sexual violence. He certainly doesn't fit the profile the psychiatrists have put together. It leads to a new theory. Perhaps McNabb, angry and desperate over the failure of his relationship, snapped. Perhaps O'Keefe was the victim of a random act of fury and not part of a serial killer's deadly rampage. But the theory doesn't hold up for long. McNabb is eventually cleared. An innocent explanation is found for the blood on his shirt. The investigation stalls. Then, by the side of a highway, a young hitchhiker accepts a ride. It will be the most terrifying trip of his life. August 9th, 1988. It's been a year since the discovery of Trevor O'Keefe's body. There are no new leads. Just dread that the killer will strike again. But in the town of Mâcon, gendarme André Genet is about to make a discovery that will blow the case wide open.
Donc au cours de l'après-midi, j'étais avec un jeune gendarme.
That day I was with a young gendarme, just on a regular patrol.
En passant, j'ai repéré un
And at one point I saw a camper van, and I said to the young guy, let's see what's going on. At that time of day, in that stretch of road, a camper van just seemed strange.
L'après-midi, ça paraissait étrange.
Good evening, officers.
Good evening, sir. May I see your papers, please?
I'm in the family as well. I'm military too.
Your papers?
Yes. Yes, certainly, yes.
Your name?
Chanel, Pierre.
Date of birth?
18th November 1946, Saint-Louis.
Profession?
Agent chef in Fontainebleau.
Driver's license, please.
It's in the back. I have to get it. Okay, just a moment.
Quand j'ai vu qu'il y avait une personne allongée, j'ai plus pensé à des gens qui venaient de faire un casse ou quelque chose et qui étaient là, qui s'étaient mis à couvert.
What's wrong here? Who's that man? Get him out of the car.
It's just a hitchhiker I picked up. I mean, he was sleeping.
Get out of the car.
He was sleeping. It's okay.
Get out!
Okay, I'm coming.
Untie him right now.
The hitchhiker is Palas Falve, a young Hungarian who is touring northern France.
Listen, we're both military. I was just having sex with him. I mean...
And he's terrified.
Help me. He's trying to kill me. Help.
Chef! Chef!
I was in the van.
Pierre Chanel insists that this is nothing more than a lover's tryst.
No, he said it was okay. He agreed, really.
Chanel says he and Falvey are both gay and enjoy rough sex. The gendarmes have caught them at an awkward moment.
Help me.
Falvey chokes out a very different story. He says he was picked up by Chanel on the side of the road. Chanel overpowered him and tied him up. He says he is convinced that Chanel is going to kill him.
No, it's okay. It was, we were just playing.
The gendarmes aren't taking chances.
Everybody back to the station.
Quand je tenais sa carte militaire dans les mains,
So when I
c'est
had
là
a
que j'ai
look
vu
at
avant
his
qu'il était
ID,
sur
I
Montmelon.
realized that
Et les
he'd been
dates
in
coïncidaient
Montmelon.
donc avec la
And the
fameuse
dates
affaire de
were the
Montmelon.
same as when the young
En
men
plus de ce qui venait
disappeared.
de se passer,
And with what
avec
Falvey
le jeune
said, I
Falvey qui
decided
disait
to
qu'il
take
allait le
everyone
tuer,
back to the
on a
station.
ramené tout le monde à l'unité.
Chanel is a career member of the French military. He has seen combat in Lebanon and has received 4 medals for bravery and service. Fellow soldiers describe him as a warrior, an incredibly fit man of steel.
Il aurait dû être
He should have been an officer.
Ces notations
All
de
of his
cette époque
evaluations would lead you to
laissent à
believe
penser
he should be an
qu'il deviendra
officer.
officier.
That was the career path
Sa
he was on.
hiérarchie souhaite qu'il devienne officier.
The gendarmes who arrest Chanel immediately call Captain Joël Vaillant. The fact that Falvey was a hitchhiker and was bound is too similar to the O'Keefe case to be ignored. Vaillant sends his second-in-command, Jean-Marie Tarbes, to investigate.
La première
The
audition a
first
duré
interrogation lasted from
3
3
heures du
to 6 in
matin
the
à
morning.
6 heures.
Right off the
J'ai
bat, I
ressenti
felt
qu'il y
something.
avait,
I had a
quelque
gut
chose.
feeling. It was something
Bon,
small.
C'était quelque chose d'assez intime, mais suffisamment fort pour me décider effectivement à poursuivre.
Alice. I am Tarp from the Special Investigation Unit in Reims. I want to talk to you about the cadets in Montmelon.
I have nothing to do with that.
But you've heard about them, haven't you?
It has nothing to do with me.
I see. Let's talk about Montmelon.
Yes, I was an instructor there, so...
Je l'ai trouvé relativement sûr de lui et très rapidement sur la défensive en même temps. Ça part de pas grand-chose, ça part d'une réponse trop hâtive ou d'une hésitation. Tout ça fait qu'on se dit que la personne qui est en face de soi cache quelque chose.
The interview continues till dawn. Whenever the conversation turns to Trevor O'Keefe or the missing cadets, Chanel denies any involvement, but becomes defensive and angry. Tarbes is deeply suspicious.
J'ai immédiatement contacté le capitaine Vaillant, qui était resté à Reims. Je me souviens parfaitement avoir dit au capitaine, celui-là, je le sens bien. Ça voulait dire qu'il fallait effectivement continuer certaines investigations, faire un curriculum vitae, un environnement de personnel.
The first thing police do is to closely examine Chanel's camper van. For 2 days, forensic experts comb the vehicle for any clues that might tie Chanel to the death of Trevor O'Keefe or the missing military cadets. In 1988, forensic science is still gaining acceptance in France, but Loïc Leribaud is a believer. He runs the top private forensics lab in the country.
Bien sûr, je n'avais aucune idée de ce que je cherchais.
I didn't know what I was looking for. Going through a car is a lot of work. This camper van was even worse.
Surchargé d'objets. Donc la première approche,
and it was absolutely full of stuff. So the first thing we did was take everything out of it, the sheets and the blankets.
Et les draps. Ensuite, j'ai fait une exploration au laser.
Then I examined it with the laser to see if I could find blood or sperm.
De liquide, de sang ou de sperme. Aspirer tout l'intérieur du minibus. Puis à faire des prélèvements avec le tamponnoir. Et bien sûr, au fur et à mesure
And of course, everything we took was put under seal. All the evidence was put in plastic bags, which we sealed with red wax, and had a tag describing the contents.
Une fiche indiquant le type d'objet qui était scellé.
There is other, more obvious evidence. Several vibrators are found, an artificial vagina. In all, 70 separate items are taken into evidence, including ropes, chains, straps, and 32 pairs of men's underwear.
Je me souviens qu'avoir trouvé un grand nombre de
I remember that we found a lot of underwear, and one pair in particular was English. It had a Marks & Spencer's label, and it was too small for Chanel.
Il se caractérisait par le fait qu'il était d'une taille inférieure au slip qu'utilisait Chanel.
The underwear leads to the latest theory, that Trevor O'Keefe was killed by Chanel. And the Irish teenager wasn't the only one. Chanel is forced to watch as the search of his van continues. A large foam mattress is removed from the back of the van. The mattress is filthy, covered with hair. The sheets are soiled with semen.
C'était en fait la
résidence
secondaire de Chanel. Son combi, en fait, c'était la pièce maîtresse à investiguer.
Chanel continues to declare his innocence. Somewhere in the items collected from his van is the forensic evidence that will help clear his name or seal his fate. It's been a year since the body of Trevor O'Keefe was found in a farmer's field in northern France. The hunt for his killer has led investigators to the cramped room of a military trainer. Gendarmes searched Pierre Chanel's barracks for proof that might connect him to O'Keefe's murder and that of several other young men. The room is spare, unadorned. It lacks even the most basic personal touch.
C'était quelqu'un d'isolé, quelqu'un d'abandonné. C'est un militaire qui ne vit que pour l'armée. C'est un homme qui n'a aucune vie, aucune vie personnelle. On sent que c'est quelqu'un qui n'aime pas le contact avec la foule, qui n'aime pas la fête. C'est un solitaire, c'est indiscutable. Et qui, même dans ce contexte-là, reste un solitaire.
Chef, regardez.
Sophisticated video equipment is found.
Chef, look, caméra. Photo.
Along with some pornographic videos.
Chef?
En 1985, j'ai indiqué au capitaine Vaillant,
in the original profile which I assembled in 1985, I told Captain Vaillant that this killer would be gay and in the military, a career member who was looking for victims he could find easily.
Qu'il pouvait trouver très très facilement, j'allais dire, dans son régiment.
One of the home movies taken from Chanel's apartment shows soldiers on maneuvers. Chanel says he shot the footage in Verdun during the first week of August. It proves he could not have killed Trevor O'Keefe. But police discover that the soldiers in the video are from a battalion that didn't go to Verdun until the 10th of August. When confronted with the lie, Chanel changes his story and says he was at his base in Fontainebleau when O'Keefe was killed. An empty checkbook found in Chanel's apartment casts doubts on that story, too. March 17th, 1989. It's been half a year since the arrest of Pierre Chanel in the Palache-Falvey case. Captain Joël Vaillant and Jean-Marie Tarbes have been carefully poring over the evidence that would tie him to the other cases.
While the investigation was continuing, we began to prepare our interrogation of Chanal.
Nous avons effectivement préparé 611
We prepared 611 questions for his interrogation. We divided them into subjects, but then we mixed them up. We wanted to see if he would be able to keep his story straight.
Pour voir jusqu'où Pierre Chanal allait rester stable dans ses réponses.
It was time to confront Chanal about the triangle of death.
There have been a number of disappearances in Mourmelon area between 1980 and 1987. August the 7th and the 20th, 1981. September the 30th, 1982.
It's impossible to say where I was on those dates.
August the 23rd, 1985.
It's impossible to say where I was on those dates.
April the 20th, 1987.
It's impossible to say where I was on those precise dates.
Listen, Chanal. Here's your signature on documents showing that you were on base on those days. This is your signature. Right, Monsieur Chanal?
Yes.
Lorsqu'on posait des questions très précises,
when we asked him very specific questions, when we backed him into a corner, his facial tics acted up. He began to get very angry, threw himself down on the floor. Then he would shut down completely.
Blocage.
One shouldn't be really surprised when sitting down and talking to these people to see a mixture of emotions, because it may not relate so much to what's being said in the interview as it is to what's going on in their own minds. And those emotions are going to seep out.
Vaillant plays one of the homemade videotapes discovered during the raid of Chanal's apartment.
Et où je passe une cassette vidéo
I put this tape in, and on it, Chanal is exposing himself. Right away, the tics began, and the sniffing, and he has this extraordinary reaction.
You made this tape, didn't you? Huh? With bands of music playing in the background? Hey, it's quite something, no?
It's an order! You calm down and keep quiet, okay? Nous allons utiliser la force pour le maîtriser, et à partir de ce moment-là, il va refuser
and after that, he refused to talk. I kept talking
Je vais
to him,
néanmoins
but it was a
continuer
monologue.
à discuter, à faire un monologue.
Monsieur Chanal, Agent Jeff, we are brothers in the military, right? So just call me.
Et je vais lui faire comprendre que
So I said that the person who did these things couldn't keep it to themselves
ne
forever.
peut pas garder de telles choses sur la conscience.
No one could keep such terrible secrets.
C'est que tôt ou tard,
And such a
il faut bien
person
libérer
would
sa
need help.
conscience.
This
que ce n'est
person
pas un
wasn't a
criminel, mais c'est
criminal,
plutôt un
they were
malade.
sick.
Let me help you.
I
Je le
felt he
sens
was
qu'il est
very
réceptif.
receptive.
Yes, Captain.
À 23h30, nous arrivons à la maison d'arrêt.
At 11:30 that night, we get back to the holding cell,
Les gardiens,
and he's confused, dazed.
complètement désemparé. Il est, je dirais même, déboussolé. Il revient vers nous,
He came back towards me.
ne sachant plus où il est,
He didn't know where he was.
déstabilisé. À ce moment-là, j'ai eu des
And
doutes.
at that moment, there was
J'aurais bien aimé poursuivre
something,
l'interrogatoire,
an understanding.
et nous ne pouvions pas
But according
légalement.
to French
Et
law,
je suis convaincu
I could not
que
question him
le fait de
further.
ne pas voir
If I could
regarder
have,
toute la nuit
I am
avec lui,
sure I could have
on a
gotten him to
perdu,
talk.
j'allais dire, une possibilité de le faire parler.
October 23rd, 1990. Pierre Chanal has been in custody for a year and a half. Finally, he comes to trial for the kidnapping of the Hungarian hitchhiker Palas Valve. Armed with a damning videotape that Chanal took of himself with Falvey and the testimony of the young hitchhiker, Chanal is sentenced to 10 years in jail. Joël Vaillant has failed to get his confession, but he's confident he can build his case with Chanal behind bars.
Quand Pierre Chanal a été mis en examen,
when Chanal was tried for the crimes against Falvey,
on s'est dit, on a
told
un peu de temps
we had the time to dig into this, to really find the proof we needed.
Matériel, des preuves concrètes de sa participation ou non,
the concrete proof that he was also involved in the other crimes.
Qu'il était impliqué. Quand il est inculpé pour l'affaire
when he was charged with Falvey, it was as clear as the nose on your face. He was guilty of everything. The families were impatient to have him charged with the disappearances of their children.
In fact, an already troubled story was just about to get much worse. June 19th, 1995, Pierre Chanal walks out of prison a free man. He has been a model prisoner. With time off for good behavior, he has served just 5 years of a 10-year sentence for kidnapping and assault. While Chanal is in prison, little progress is made on any of the evidence gathered from his van. Procedural delays and legal wrangling have stalled the investigation. The man some suspect of being a brutal serial killer responsible for the deaths of at least 8 young men faces no new charges.
Nous n'avions pas réuni tous les éléments, nous avions encore des expertises qui étaient en cours, et l'opinion commençait à se retourner également contre nous parce qu'on nous taxait de lenteur.
The families of the men who have disappeared throughout northern France are appalled.
C'est, pour mes parents en tout cas, le scandale, l'injustice totale.
We felt let down by the system again. Judge Charles Marion sat at a table very near to me and he promised me, he said he promised he would not release Chanel. He said Chanel will do 10 years in prison, but he didn't.
Chanal is out of jail, but watched carefully. Under intense pressure, Chanal maintains his innocence. He calls a local radio station to plead his case.
In spite of my innocence, I know that I'll be found guilty. And if that happens, I'll end my life.
Je mettrai fin à mes jours immédiatement.
Je pense qu'il a essayé d'inverser les rôles.
I think he tried to turn the tables, reverse the role. The families were the aggressors, and he held himself up as a victim. He wanted it to seem as if the entire system had turned against him.
With pressure from the families growing, a new judge is appointed to the Chanal case, Pascal Shepard. His main focus, the forensic evidence gathered from Chanal's van. For years, it has been stored in a dusty attic. The new judge demands that it all get sent to him.
Pascal Shepard, pour moi, hormis le fait que c'est quelqu'un que j'admire, c'est en fait l'homme qui a permis, en tout cas, de relancer le dossier.
We went to see Shepard on his own, and he said, I will not leave this case until it moves. I promise you, he said, I won't leave.
In spite of his determination, progress is slow. The crimes occurred in several different jurisdictions. Jean-Marie Tarbes re-examines the evidence taken from Chanal's van. He finds several hundred pieces of hair and other evidence that have been collected but never analyzed. Jean-Paul Moissin is called in to examine the new evidence.
Les échantillons qui nous ont été envoyés correspondaient tous à des cheveux ou poils, à divers endroits dans le véhicule.
We examined 457 hairs.
Donc on a analysé 457 cheveux exactement. Nous avons trouvé pour
some of those belong to Chanal, and we found 3 kinds of mitochondrial DNA.
Et également, on a trouvé 3 motifs d'ADN mitochondrial qui correspondent à 3 des victimes.
It corresponded to 3 of the victims, Gash,
Patrice Denis et Balak Falvey. Donc la probabilité de trouver quelqu'un d'autre avec le même motif dans la population générale est de l'ordre de 0,06%.
The possibility of this match with somebody in the general population is 0.06%, which is rare but not out of the question.
Par contre, il faut
But remember,
aussi
we
comprendre qu'on
found
a
three
retrouvé
different sets of DNA from three different victims. In a vehicle we suspected they had been picked up in.
Suspecté d'avoir transporté ces personnes.
What might be another key piece of forensic evidence has gone missing. Lot 19 has disappeared.
Le fameux scellé numéro
The famous lot
19
19 was the one which contained a sample of earth which came from the shovel we found in Chanel's van. And as the case was so important, I kept my own sample, saying to myself, this is significant.
Peut-être un jour on en aurait besoin.
Le Ribot's sample from the blade of the shovel is compared with the dirt found at the shallow grave of Trevor O'Keefe. Tiny crystals in the dirt are unique to the region and are identical in both samples.
I know that the shovel in Chanel's van was used to dig the grave. I'm not saying who was holding it. What I am saying is that this is the shovel that was used to bury Trevor O'Keefe.
Police Captain Joël Vaillant wants more. To build his case, Vaillant consults an American expert.
Je me suis rendu à Quantico, au FBI. Nous avons été reçus par James Wright pour nous donner les conclusions de ces travaux.
When they came over, I didn't speak French and they didn't speak English. We had a translator, but there was some times where we didn't need a translator because we really knew what we were saying because of that common language and the camaraderie and the brotherhood.
Il nous a dit qu'effectivement,
From the
nous étions
information we
face
gave
à un
him,
serial
he
killer,
confirmed that we
et
were
que
up
ce genre
against a serial
d'individu
killer.
ne pouvait
This type
cesser
of person will
l'activité que
only
de deux
stop
façons.
in two ways.
Soit ils étaient arrêtés,
They are arrested
soit ils se
or they will
suicidaient.
kill themselves.
The gendarmes feel that they're closing in. It will take several more years, but the case of Pierre Chanel does finally make it to court. October 14th, 2003. 16 years after the body of Trevor O'Keefe was found in a shallow grave, the trial of Pierre Chanel finally begins. But Chanel is not there to hear the charges against him. He is too weak to attend the trial. A suicide attempt has landed him in hospital. And for the last 3 months, he has refused to eat.
Le procès va avoir lieu.
The trial will take place, even though Chanel is sent to hospital in rounds,
Je le vois la
because he
veille de
was on
la
a hunger
première
strike.
audience.
I saw him the day
Grève de
before
la
the
faim
trial
très dur,
began.
il maigrit, il plus que
He looked like a
squelette.
skeleton.
C'est quelqu'un
His
dans un
physical
état
state was
physique terrible.
precarious,
Et sur le
but
plan
his
moral, en
mental state
revanche, il
was
reste
fine.
toujours cette
He was
détermination.
determined.
Je
From the
veux
moment I
mourir,
became his
je vais
lawyer,
mourir.
he said
Dès que je suis
he had
devenu son
already
avocat,
been
il m'a
tried
toujours
and
dit,
convicted,
il a toujours affirmé
and he vowed
qu'il
he
n'irait pas au
would never
procès,
go to
que
trial.
si le procès doit avoir lieu, il était condamné d'avance et qu'il n'affronterait pas ce procès.
The case of Pierre Chanel is about to take its final shocking turn. Pierre Chanel is on trial for the murder of Trevor O'Keefe and the disappearance of 2 other young men. The case rests on 3 slender pieces of hair and a pile of dirt. It's not a lot, but it's the best shot at putting a suspected serial killer behind bars.
La première après-midi que le procès s'ouvre, Chanel refuse
The
d'être
first afternoon of the trial, Chanel refused to be there. His lawyer was there.
C'est quelque
The
chose de
trial goes
complètement
forward.
inespéré car
And
jusqu'au
for us,
dernier
it was
moment,
almost a
nous
miracle.
avions
We didn't think the
été
trial would take
persuadés
place.
que le procès n'aurait jamais lieu. Premier soir,
And the evening after the first day, we were
presque
euphoric. Finally, we would
on va
have
l'avoir
him
en
in
face de
front of
nous.
us. And we had
En
heard
plus,
that
nous
he
avons
had
appris en
started
fin
to eat
d'après-midi qu'il a
again.
recommencé à s'alimenter.
For us, a page
Ça y est,
had
pour
turned.
nous,
This was
la
a
page
new
est
chapter.
tournée, nous rentrons dans le vif du sujet.
The euphoria is short-lived. The very night his trial begins, Chanel makes good on his defiant threat. He hides the blade from a disposable razor in the tape of his IV tube. He uses it to slice into his right thigh. He severs his femoral artery. silently, alone in his hospital bed, Pierre Chanel bleeds to death.
Frisson.
I shivered.
Je lui dis, mais il est
I said,
vraiment mort.
you mean he's really
Et là,
dead?
tout d'un coup, je suis
And
comme si
then I
j'avais
realized that everything was
quelqu'un qui
gone.
m'était proche.
Everything had melted away.
Ça y est, tout s'est
We had done all of
Nous
this
avons fait
for
tout
nothing.
ça pour rien.
Chanel had won.
Il a gagné.
But we felt cheated of justice. We were robbed of justice. Chanel should be in prison. He shouldn't be dead.
Toutes les familles cherchaient à savoir
All
ce
the
qui était devenu
families
leurs
wanted to
enfants.
know what
Ça,
had happened to their
la première
children.
réaction, c'est de se dire
So
qu'on
our
ne le
first
saura jamais.
reaction was,
La
we'll never
deuxième
know.
réaction, c'est
And then
davantage de la
we were
colère.
angry.
C'était, j'ai une fin tragique.
It was a tragic end for him,
mais
but it was
également
even more so for the families.
de chagrin pour les familles.
The death of Pierre Chanel ends the string of disappearances that had haunted northern France. The publicity of the trial also forces military officials to take one last look at their records. In 2004, the names of two other recruits who have disappeared turn up. Both Michel Giannini and Aldo Tacchini vanished in the late 1970s. Both of them were based in Valdo, another camp where Chanel was an instructor. The man who stared Chanel in the face believes there are even more bodies.
J'ai toujours en l'esprit,
in the back of my mind,
peut y
I know
avoir
there are more
d'autres
victims,
disparitions
other hitchhikers who have
qui n'ont
disappeared,
pas été élucidées,
we may
qui
never
peuvent
know.
avoir une corrélation avec les autres disparitions.
The families who fought for so long to get their story heard do finally win an important victory. Until 2002, the French military still considered the men deserters. But in 2005, it relents. And in court, the families win a landmark settlement.
Le tribunal de grande instance de Paris a rendu un jugement extrêmement courageux qui véritablement, pour nous les avocats, a réhabilité la justice. Le tribunal a reconnu l'ensemble des fautes graves qui ont été commises par la justice d'un bout à l'autre de la l'affaire. Le tribunal a accueilli et reconnu toutes les personnes que nous représentions comme étant des victimes, non seulement
de Pierre Chanel,
entre parenthèses, qui n'était pas dit, mais de la justice.
The families of the missing men receive money and recognition, but after so many years, bitterness remains.
Bon, alors c'est une satisfaction, parce que c'est la première fois en gros qu'on reconnaît que les victimes ont été maltraitées. Mais c'est aussi, on a le doute que cette décision ne serve qu'à définitivement enterrer l'affaire.
The crimes of Pierre Chanel die with him. The truth is buried forever. The families, already missing sons and brothers, will never have the answers they need.